Okay, so I will say a few things first. This talk will agitate a few. And it's because I'm going to challenge how you do everything today. I don't want you to judge me up front. As we go through, I think the logic will play itself out, and then you'll recognize how, including Datadog, currently approaches things today, such as their error tracking assistant and stuff needs to adjust how we use them and where we use them, and we're going to get into that. So what you've heard at every APM conference is confidence in production. How do I handle incidences with low stress? The talk that we're going to go about today, I'm not cutting out, am I? Okay. Talk we're going to go about today is to prevent the incidents entirely, and it's fully functional and achievable. So we're going to go through that. I will give some session framing. The reason being is there's some cost implications for what I'm suggesting. So there are 3 principles that we have. This is essentially how do you do DevOps SRE really, really well. We're going to focus on the CISO principle, which is no humans have access to shared environments, which is essentially what Datadog's trying to do. So for day 1 or day 2 activities, you don't log into systems to figure things out. You have it all available in Datadog. By itself, not enough. You may not change any existing services or machines. This is essentially the ability to deploy unmanned, ephemeral environments and things like that. And then the engineering value must be delivered with a degree of separation from the right to that person having a good life that doesn't suck. And the context to that is CI/CD, right? It's something with regards to workflows, although I don't think workflows make sense outside of CI/CD. Okay, so let's go into what the market's direction currently is. Obviously, there's the generative AI that everybody's talking about. Put that to the side because it's nowhere useful for most people. Let's go with full stack observability, which is what I think everybody's trying to achieve, which is I want telemetry, I want logs that I can actually look at and then make a response to. So it's pulling it from all layers of applications, infrastructures, IaaS, PaaS, CaaS, all of that. But in reality, it's confidence in production. Today, every conference before, it's not confidence for production. And I want to ask a simple question here is how many people in this audience are actually heroes? Meaning they're frontline, they have an incident, and they triage. Of those people that put their hands up, is it painful? Is it destructive to your families? Are your partners saying, screw you, get out of that job? And then, I won't say the other words. But you're in that circumstance. And what I'm going to show today will help the organization, your business, transition from confidence in production to for production, making your lives less hell-like. And I'm going to add that telemetry or that measure that's missing. So the market's actually missing an element. The error tracking that they had the assistant is also missing an element. Everything presented today was missing an element, and we're going to go into what that was. So this is not my phrase. Observability-driven development is what it is, and it's 5 to 10 years out. And we're going to go through how you actually achieve that with any APM, including Datadog. I took a Gartner piece just because it gives people understanding of the hype cycle around things, but I put an arrow next to it. It's essentially 5 to 10 years. So its benefits is there's no business pressure during incidences, and we'll get how that's possible. Low mental pressure, meaning the stuff that you panic when you're going to have a penalty or people are putting all the pressure on you to resolve it. You're the superhero that wears a cape and sweats out shirts and changes your clothing regularly. And then you have proactive insights for production, meaning you know what's going to happen in production before it occurs and you determine which ones you want to break and which ones you don't. And again, it helps you define your error budget impact. People keep looking at error budgets in a way of, oh, I can make more mistakes. It's actually, I know I'm going to make a mistake. I'm okay with that mistake, and I can deal with it, and it fits. How do you do that? Again, the hurdles, investment is in production. Everything presented today of all the demos were prod. None of this is prod. It's all wrong. Everything we're doing is wrong. The market's wrong. The knowledge base is wrong. Our practice is wrong. Our spend is wrong. The market selling is wrong. The leadership is wrong. And then again, the market hasn't innovated, so I'm going to show you some startups that do augment what Datadog's capable of doing in a good measure, but you need some augmentation to get this new capability that doesn't currently exist. So I'll go in, and this is what reality of in-production confidence is. So it's a little bit of humor. This is what our lives are like. This is what a hero looks like. And the fun part happens now. And yeah, this is it, right? It just keeps happening. It just keeps happening. I always have an incident that I didn't know was going to happen. No, the APM didn't have any prior knowledge of it. And no, it didn't give me any insights that were relevant. And yes, my life is hell. It's shit. Not the products, how we use them. Okay, so I'm going to try to give a context here because frontline, many, many years, not stressed anymore. And the context behind this is we are frontline workers. You just take the context of healthcare versus technology. Healthcare workers know of burnout, and they're very protective of them at this point. Technology-oriented, not at all. We're invisible. Most organizations just hire more people and say, don't worry, we'll fix it with more people. But in reality, you're burning through people's livelihoods and their lives, because the harder you burn, the shorter your life is. Again, your personal time draw. Who hasn't had a personal time draw with an incident? How many people have had incidences that took their personal time outside of 9 to 5? Oh, yeah, that's shit. Look, and that comes down to ping pong causation. When it happens in prod, doesn't matter the technology, doesn't matter if it's AI, doesn't matter if it's an assistant, a co-pilot, it ain't gonna help you. It'll help you to a degree, but that data's already happened. You're already broken. You're already there. It's already affected your personal life. The stress has happened, so why is it happening in prod? And again, the culture in this case is superheroes. And we promote superheroes and hire superheroes, pay them more, compensate them more, but it ruins your life. AI supported, don't get me wrong, but the AI support is very stressful. Who here finds that all the AI tools that they have just make their incidences go very melt away? It's butter, it's awesome. Again, we're trying to look at this, and we should be predicting and preventing versus trying to do MTTR. Why did the incident occur? Why do I need an MTTR? Why am I putting bad shit in prod? Again, customer environments is the focus, and I will get to you can lose your life. Because you won't be sitting here, but I've watched people go, and it's usually from mental health. What could it look like? So confidence for production. High initial draw. Everything I'm going to show you today, which we haven't got to, I'm just laying the groundwork, so it's very interesting and intriguing. High initial draw. It takes a lot of work to get this done. You're not currently doing it. How many people currently have heavy observability in non-prod? Oh, shit, no hands. Hopefully those words get bleeped. Accountability is very clear. How many times have you had an incident that the right person was engaged and no one else was engaged? No hands? Okay. Oh, one? Okay, everybody else has shit. Culture, again, that's not narcissism. That's just taking care of yourself. I just couldn't find a better way of self-care. This is what they suggested to me, is looking at the mirror and loving yourself. And then AI insights, they become really good, but before you go to prod. In prod AI insights, you're already under stress, you already ruined your life. So how do I start this? Dude, like, enough, you talked too much already. So let's jump straight into it. Okay, I'm gonna make some statements that are very important, and if you're not doing this today, you're doing it completely wrong and you'll never correct this. So some of these are just statements to get this going. If you don't have an issue type mapping to a SME, and you're using whatever platforms or software that doesn't make this happen, get rid of it unless it does this. So what I mean by that is, if I have full stack observability, meaning I bring in all the metrics, I know what's wrong, what's broken, make sure that the incident at least starts with an event type alerting and notifying the right corrective team. This is just a starting point. Remember, this is not in production, we're talking about non-production. You can do it in production too, but you shouldn't really have any of those incidences. Production is paged, non-production doesn't have to be paged, but you do have to have a measurement and an identification that the issue exists so you can then work on it and prevent it happening in prod. just keep in mind that when you do if you remember the principles at the beginning, that environments are immutable, you're deploying without people there, Git flow is very important, GitOps very important. Environments change without people being there. So if you break environments and you don't know it, the whole Git flow to production breaks. It's all intricate. Okay, let's go. Let's go forward. SLOs for non-production. I only had one person put up the hand that they have observability in non-production. How many people have SLOs in non-production? What? Well, you should have put up your hand earlier for the other one, so I don't know. This is wishy-washy. Okay, so before you do the SLOs in non-production, Datadog came out with a tool that helps you right-size. Do that first. There's no point to an SLO in an environment that you're going to resize, because then all of the metrics that you're training it for and going to alert on are irrelevant because you're going to change it. So right-size first. Use the Datadog capabilities to right-size. Fantastic. Again, the error budget that everybody talks about has nothing to do with prod. Error budgets are defined by observability in non-prod, that then you go with an assessment and say, should I do this because the business needs it? I'm going to take a hit. The hit is exactly this, and I know exactly how to fix it, but the hit still happens because dev can't fix it in time, or the infrastructure is just the way it is and I can't do anything about it. That's an error budget. Any other definition's moronic. Non-prod SLOs are really key, and always set them to P95. We've seen all their demos with P95. P95 is super important. It's basically saying take all the outliers out, and this value really tells you you're screwed if it goes outside of that threshold. Again, there are three types of targets. There is the reliability, which is the code response that you get. There's the performance, which is the throughput. And then the availability, which is uptime. This is the definitions of Datadog. I just use them. Every other vendor has different ones. But there's generally three. Am I getting a response? Is the response fast enough? And am I up? Everybody's good at am I up? I mean, you could do synthetics as well. I don't really think it's too important if you do a good job of RUM. Okay, performance as a service is very important to prevent outages in production. What essentially is, which we're not going to go too deep into, the deployment of performance testing as automation as part of your Git flow, meaning a load generator with a profile, and those profiles should be cold, warm, hot, with different degrees of 4x, 6x, 10x, and then define degraded versus down for every service. I'm presenting here as actually a startup, which is called rely.io, and I'm not doing it in any way other than I find them cool. They're an SLO workbench, and they're really good for time-based performance validation and predictability. So if you want 30 minutes SLA, which currently Datadog doesn't support less than 7 days, you could do an SLA of 30 minutes while I'm doing my performance test. Here's what I expect it to be, and it would tell you through an API if your performance SLA is met or not, and then predict would this pass even without running the test, digesting Datadog metrics. Again, this reduces the cycle on QA, because again, if we're going to be wickedly autonomous, QA can't be extremely slow. So performance as a service is a layer. And then I just given some guidance. I can share the content if anybody wants, that you can go 2x, 4x, 10x, 100x. Obviously, you'll find out where every service breaks. Document and set metrics for degraded patterns for every service and down patterns for every service. Alert on them or predict them when you use services that can do very time-based specific SLAs. Long-term based SLAs are quite useless when it comes to observability-driven development, which is why it's not part of the platforms in any APM today. Okay, this one's a learned behavior. Every AI learns based on time and things that are in hot data, meaning you need to index your logs for longer. If you do the 7-day pattern and you have an issue that happens on 8-day frequency, it sees nothing. Completely useless. So always do 15 to 30, just because it's a good basis within non-production to see long-living issues that are intermittent, so that you capture the ones that could hurt you over a long period of time, and people go, oh, I was surprised that happened. No, that's because you didn't check it in non-prod over 15 to 30 days, and the AI doesn't work without the index logs. So I'm just trying to show you that it's very important to increase your time of indexing. 7 days, I think, is too short. Most average incidences are much longer durations when you're doing large enterprise applications. Deployments with visibility. So I don't know how many people today are currently tracking their performance and comparing versions of their deployments. Okay, pretty good. How many here are comparing versions between environments of non-prod and prod? One. Okay, but you didn't have the hand up on the earlier ones. Okay, so the context here is not about comparing. Today it's limited to comparing within the environment, but really you should be manually comparing yourself between environments. So if I have a version running in non-production, I'm going to compare that to a production, completely different environment, maybe different hardware. But you need to compare the reliability and SLOs between the two environments so you don't deploy a version that's poor in comparison to the existing version, even though you have SLOs, because comparatively you're degrading the system over time. Again, I think it's important that you include deployment strategies. How many people do zero downtime deployment strategies? Blue-green, canary. Okay, a lot more people. You can include this as part of the making sure you don't deploy the wrong things into the environment and having them appropriately tested before they go live, even though you've been building production confidence. So let's go into making a plan. And I've shared how I've done this before and how I'm along this line as well. So it depends which job I'm in at the time, but I go through this process. Every organization, because I've never come across an organization that has the non-prod spend. Everybody says APMs are expensive. APMs are expensive. I'm not going to tell you they're not. So for the first month, actually go through your bad config. How many people have alerts that are just there and you're like, why the shit is that there? Okay, the people who have their hands down are lying. So everybody has this. I came into an organization many times, and you usually have like 35 to 45 alerts that are constantly there, and you're going, what the shit? It's usually they're configured wrong, they're polling wrong, the synthetic's wrong, the query's wrong, whatever it is, most of it's incorrect. So spend time correcting the bad configuration, because again, with bad configuration, you're never gonna get any good insights. The second is forecast your non-prod budget. The non-prod budget, you're not going to get. No one's going to give it to you. Yeah. So you need to forecast it, and then you're going to need to do new methods, which is destroy the non-prod environments. I know that sounds irrational, and we're not at that maturity level, but ephemeral non-production or impermanent non-production, which are terms I coin, you can for sure do it if you follow the principles, and I have different talks if you want to look them up, how to do each of those tasks separately. But essentially, you should be not keeping your non-prod systems, which means I'm not indexing anything. I don't have any custom metrics. And use Terraform, which we'll get to along the lines to do monitoring as code. So if I do destroy an environment and I need to bring it back, easy to bring back the monitoring, easy to bring back the environment, easy to bring back the applications, which are all deployed together in an ephemeral environment. So you now have money for non-prod. You haven't gotten there yet, and you're like, dude, that's a lot of work. But you'll get your money for non-prod by cutting operational costs of your cloud and not using Datadog when you don't need it. So again, maybe it contradicts the idle system things that they have, because in the methods that you should be doing, not keeping idle systems, you'd actually destroy them versus optimize. Don't keep them once you're done testing, because I collected my metrics. Config and integrations. Now, full stack observability is month 3. Do you have your Confluent Cloud integration? Did you integrate with all of the other components, which you don't pay for on Datadog? This is like a huge benefit, but most people don't realize you don't pay for the integrations if they're native. Why the hell would you not integrate? Go through every single technology you use and configure them in any of the APMs you use. I don't know if the other ones charge or not, but for Datadog, you don't pay for those. They're native. They're made them available based on these custom integrations. Free POV, I'm not overstepping, but Datadog will step out there and help you figure out what this is actually going to cost to run in non-prod. And they'll reimburse you those costs because they want you to advance and do better. They want to see you succeed. It's just the market isn't pushing you to spend in non-production, which is actually preventing all the things we're building as remediation, as these workflows for production, when in reality you can fix it in non-prod before it's a stressful event. Then you don't need to be fast. You can do it at your own pace, at your own time, in non-prod. And when you put it to prod, nothing happens. And if things are happening in prod, go look at what you're not doing in non-prod. Okay, so now that you've negotiated really hard with your sales rep or account executive, you got a good price, you know your 30 days, what it's gonna cost, you get the budget because you're blowing away your non-production systems, you basically figure out what's missing. What are the synthetics and monitors you're missing? They showed on the dashboards today, or the demos today, you don't have a monitor for this, you don't have synthetics for this, turn those on. You actually need them. They're really, really important. The reason being is they simulate the user, and they'll alert as fast as possible so you can have a query that checks out if you can check out. I'm not gonna wait for a user to do that. What if it's 3 in the morning and you break and a user isn't using it? I need the synthetic to alert me immediately. That's the difference. You don't know your traffic patterns of your users. Where I work, people use it all the time, which is mostly gaming, gambling, and all that sort of stuff, sports betting. So we have people playing all the time. So no, I don't have that circumstance, but some organizations aren't that busy all the time. They have normal curves. Set up the 3 types of SLOs. Don't go with uptime, without throughput. Don't go without any of the other ones, availability, performance. Availability, performance, I don't remember the third one, not coming to mind. Again, that's your customer assurance. You need all 3. If you don't have all 3, what are you measuring? And if you don't put them, then nobody knows you're actually failing. The next part, which is readily available, is they're a Terraform provider for most of the APMs today. I don't know what we're doing without them. You drift on every environment. Why would you not drift on your observability platform? You for sure drift on your observability platform. Give every application team a config values file, just like Terraform. Here's your values file. This is what gets created when you deploy. Oh, you put a new app? Okay, put a new value entry for a new HTTP monitor. Fantastic. It gets tracked on deployment. Observability becomes a sanity check for their quality gates. Do you have your Terraform for your new added feature? Yes, I do. I have a new monitor. Fantastic. So you don't actually have a gap in observability. QA automation, I think, is the highest value. The market's not going in this direction yet. They haven't hit this maturity. But essentially, QA becomes your bottleneck once you fixed environments, because they have to persist longer than you want them to. So I leave environments running for weeks, even though the test should be running for, let's say, an hour or 2. This piece, I think, is very important. This is actually, I blurred it out because I don't want to use people's names, but this is in loving memory of a member I lost of my team due to depression and suicide. This happens. Frontline workers die. Technology, healthcare, we're ignoring it. The problem is the market best practices are terrible. I only had one hand. In reality, if you switch to non-production spend, production becomes seamless. What happens in prod? An SLA of 100%, which is contradicted to Google. I don't know if Google's here. It can be attained easily. You could do 100% SLA. Done it. Year long. You just need to do observability and non-prod extensively as prod. But you don't have customers there, which is wickedly awesome because it's not stressful. And you don't have to quickly fix it. You can just say, hold on, I'll fix this once I'm done spending time with my kids who should have time with their parent. Okay, so I try to leave this with a mental health side, which is bad things are always going to happen. You can't do anything about that. They're not in your control. You can't change that. But when I build confidence for production using these methods, I'll know why it happened, and I can deal with that. It's when I don't know why it happened, it's extreme stress, because your livelihood is on the line. Your company's livelihood is on the line. Every person at your company and all their families' livelihoods are on the line. Their mental health is on the line. Depression can happen. Bad things can happen. But we're doing it wrong. Now, I leave this open to AMA to anything you want. If it's technology, I'll answer the question. If it's a contradiction, I like it. Open for questions.
Awesome. Anybody have a question? If not, I can get things started. I know sometimes we're a little shy to ask the first one, but if anybody has one. Oh, I got some hands. Here we go.
How to use this stuff. Can you hear me? Nice. So one problem, I love the idea, by the way. So non-prod, I have been carrying the pager for 23 years as a DevOps guy, so I know how stressed it is. I never drive around out of the Bay Area because I have to be 30 minutes away to a computer. If I am away, I carry my laptop with me all the time. So the problem is for non-prod, the major difference is the load. So sometimes the thing was triggered on prod because of the load, and we never had the same load, or the company never paid for that much of the load through simulation or something. So that's my question. So how do we make it as
Let's see how
close as-
fast I can go backwards to the beginning. Let's see if I can hold it. It goes faster. No, you got to click it. So this is a common question that I get, and that's why I said we're only covering one of the topics, but my other talks cover how you get to actually implementing this. So the most important thing that we didn't touch on, if I get back one more, when I have the CIO principle where I can't touch an existing system, I always have to deploy new. And I don't keep it when I don't need it. So what happens is, this is the crazy part, which people, all again, market's completely wrong. Best practices are completely wrong. If I build environments with applications seamlessly, with observability, because it's part of the Terraform, what essentially happens is you stand up your environments, you use them what you need them for, and then you tear them down. Now, one distinguished difference, they're the same size as prod. The reason being is I can afford them because it's a short period of time. Now, if you do permanent environments, which everybody thinks they need, which is a bunch of BS, unless it's a regulatory requirement, you don't need them. You're just worried of rebuilding them and getting it back to the state that you were. You'd lose time. It's counterintuitive because then you're never going to get to the point where you can actually destroy them and not keep them. So what happens is, and it's very common, when you do ephemeral environments for non-prod, they match production. There's two benefits. One, any malicious code is instantaneously destroyed because anything someone left behind is gone, unless it's part of the source code. And second, it matches prod. Now, there is an area of this where I do think that the performance testing that you have needs to mimic much more than production. So now that you've matched the environments in size, you're going to run load on a system that mimics prod through code, mimics prod through code, zero drift. I'm going to run significant load, 2x, 4x, 10x, 100x. I'm right now working on 100x prod. We already did 10x. We're doing 100x. When will I hit 100x? I don't know. If we do wicked business, we'll hit 100x. But I'm going to know when I degrade at what x on each service. So fundamentally, you have to do the CIO principle first, because none of this can be facilitated budget-wise unless the environments match code-wise, but you can't persist. If you persist, you'll have an exponential growth of your budget every single environment you make. But if I don't keep them and I only run them for, let's say, 4 hours, easy can match production, easy. These are the practices that are not well known to the market because the market's generally wrong and propagates poor information, but you can attain this. Like most organizations know how to do blue-green. Most organizations know how to do multiple versions. Now put the app and infrastructure to work together. DevOps is already promoting that. Do it. Blow the environment away. Persist the data if you want. Like sometimes test data management is difficult if you have terabytes of data. You can persist the data sets and then they just attach to the environments. More questions? It doesn't have to be observability driven. You can ask different questions.
Anybody else? Got any hands? Oh, over there, yeah. I'm gonna get close enough I can actually throw it to you. So I don't embarrass myself in front of everybody.
So yeah, thanks for the example on using synthetic checks for like API calls. So let's say you're deploying a checkout service and you want to see if that breaks overnight. How do you recommend developers, application developers who are looking to automate this within their code base? I know you mentioned monitoring as code. Do you have any best practices for like if they have some MyFu app and they would like to take for all of those endpoints that have particular payload? How do you convert that easily for synthetics? I would probably imagine just do it, but I don't know if you have any tricks and tips for that as well.
I'm getting an echo from that. Do you maybe want to shout it?
Sure. So quick question is that for synthetic checks, if you're going to try to automate for developer experiences, their front end, maybe like their Swagger payloads of like, here are the things I need to call. How do you translate that easier for developers who just want to start using synthetic checks? I'm sure it's just like, just do it, but what's your best practices?
Okay, so there's two pieces here that are fundamentally missing in the market. And it It counters synthetics. Synthetics are only needed in circumstances where it's a critical service, but not for all services because for multiple reasons. One, cost. Two, it produces a lot of traffic on the environment where you don't want your monitoring capacity to eat up your customer capacity. So the approach there is you do an internal health check, which I'll go through two. There's two sides to it. There's the Helm test equivalent, and we'll get to what that is. And you have the lost train of thought that I was mentioning before. Internal health monitors. So the internal health monitor should be service, version, health. For every sub-service that gets aggregated into a code that Datadog then checks. So I get one call to a service that may have 15 URIs or 20 URIs. And if I add a new API, I add a new URI, and then I pull that code. You could make custom codes that Datadog could then ingest to tell you exactly which service failed on that container. That blows your mind. People are like, oh shit, I don't have to investigate anything. No, you don't. Development doesn't know about these methods. It's not very common to have these internal self-checks with error codes that are defined based on the service failures. The synthetic should be there for critical services that if I miss 10 seconds, 30 seconds, it hits me $5 million. Put your synthetic. If it's not business critical, do internal health checks, aggregate them, present those codes to Datadog. Do not create lots of synthetics. You'll blow your budget. It doesn't make sense. Helm test is to prevent developers from deploying incorrect API additions. The Helm test should be aggregated every time you add a new URI exposed service, add that to the Helm test before you cut over Helm upgrade or whatever you're doing for your blue, green, or Canary, or whatever you're using, AB, it doesn't matter. It won't cut over because your Helm test will fail because that API endpoint is bad, or a subsection of the API endpoint, however you term it. More questions?
Any other questions?
You have free consultation right here. Come on.
Anybody else?
All
Oh,
right.
there we go. We got a brave soul.
This is an AMA. You're supposed to ask like really, really harsh questions. Okay, the reality of that is, how do I say this? The business is allowing development to do a poor job. And the reality of it is you need to raise the human impact to the operational teams that need to keep the systems running, that are the stewards of the customers. So what's happened there is there's a degree of separation from the development quality and the impact it has on production. So when a developer, some organizations think that developers need to go on call, and if you have a healthy culture, it works. If you don't have a healthy culture, it's disastrous. It's very hard to fix the culture within an organization if it's unhealthy, but you need to present data back to the business that says, for example, let's say you're deploying this web and you have 58 human changes to get it running in production. You then create a timeline. You present it to the leadership and say, I had 18 people on the call for X amount of time, 8 hours, let's say. We ran into the evening, X thousand hours aggregate with 58 changes because we're not testing properly and not broad. This is unacceptable. I'm using an example. Now the leadership will come back and say, this is an epic failure, Shlomo. Anyways, you don't have to use my name. And you'll say, you're right, it is. And now that I've told you it exists, let's fix this shit. So present your epic failure. The epic failure is a misunderstanding between departments that don't see the value in protecting everybody's harmony in life. And I think if you present the data in a measured manner, you can graphically display it across each service. 52 changes here, 42 changes here, 19 people here, 30 people here. A deployment should be unmanned. Testing can be unmanned, except humans still need to exist in QA, to be very frank. The reason being is tests miss stuff. So you still have humans, but for a short period of time.
So we have applications that are in production running our company that are older than at least half the people in this room. There's 1,000 member IT organization. So it's not a matter of like we're trying to do these things, and in our newer environments we're able to do that and collaborate with other systems that are newer, and we're getting much better at doing that. but it's going to be a long time to even get the feasibility. And I can't imagine we're the only ones that have to deal with the fact that these IT organizations are large enough.
I do agree. Like, this happens a lot, and for two reasons. Generally, the leaders need to be replaced. And second is you need a leader that takes it on. So for example, a financial institution had an AS400. How many people know what an AS400 is? Okay, see, I got you in there. And it's not great for automation, but the connective tissue that you can create within a CI/CD process can actually integrate an AS400. AS400 still in itself as a mainframe isn't very agile, but every task around it, validating the output, that can all be automated. And then what you do is you have robotic processes around a human element, and the human element is strung into the robotic processes, so it advances those systems. But in reality, every leader should be measured for adopting better practices, advancing better DORA metrics. I'm not going to go into DORA metrics because we don't measure those right either, and I have developed apps that do a better job. But in that circumstance, we're not measuring leaders, and if that leader doesn't progress, if their department doesn't progress, you take them and you replace them. Again, large organizations generally have people who have stayed a long time and moved up, maybe not for the right reasons of progress, but progress is your desire. If you present the harm to the people across the board with metrics, that light will come and shine on that leader who's not corrective. You have to shine the light. That epic failure will come to a leader. In my circumstance, I was the leader that had the epic failure, but I presented it with fearlessness, right? I presented it and corrected.
Well, we're lucky then because we have some new leadership that came from outside the company. There's some hope.
You can make hope if you present the data correctly. Any more questions?
You want to go for the thing? Try it? Okay.
You like throwing that, Eric, eh?
So we are new adopters of basically Datadog. And what happened was last week there was an issue, and my organization did not pay for traces. And we rely heavily on traces. So when we went to the issue and when we went to Datadog, we didn't find traces, and we had to enable traces. But the problem is, if I enable trace, it's still not going to help me because it does not go in retrospection. That is what I understand. That is what I was told. And I will not have that trace. So what is the solution in that case? So even if I spawn, like in UAT environment, the whole environment, I'm not going to get the trace, right?
I mean, because you didn't have tracing on, so...
Right.
Yeah, so the context to this is if you put a requirement for a service level objective and traces are important, then you would have turned traces on because the SLO wouldn't work. So when you apply an SLO, an SLO can go on a request, which is HTTP, or it can go on a trace. So I didn't go into that detail, but if you have things, sometimes if you don't have an APM profiler, requests actually become traces. Let's not get into that if you use unusual languages like Erlang. But in your circumstance, if you have an SLO objective and you work with the development teams to say, what are the things that happen that I need to actually have an SLO on, they will go and say, oh, it's not a request, it's a trace. Traces are really hard to create SLOs. That's why I suggest Rely, because we were unable to do it. It's really easy to do a request SLO. Traces are almost impossible unless you have a specialist that knows how to do trace-based SLOs. And that's why you use like the SLO workbench that I presented. They're very hard to create. I tried the logic, and I generally don't fail at things. I failed at that 100%. I couldn't get it. And I needed to find a vendor on planet Earth that could help me with that, and I did. So the context is traces are extremely valuable, but they're very hard to measure. which is why you need to, at this point in the market, use startups to help augment Datadog in this case. Yeah, I mean, I can share the deck. There is some Datadog members that went through this journey with me here, because when I go to each job, I do it with the platform that they have. So I can share the data, but in reality, the data out there is erroneous, which is why I do these talks, which is the methods at which we do observability, sell observability, develop observability is entirely erroneous. And it has value, it's just being placed in the wrong area. It's placed where the customer is versus placed before it goes to the customer. And then when it goes to the customer, it's nothing, it's a non-event, which is really outside the name why it is. It's no stress because the incident didn't occur. Like, incidents only occur because your testing wasn't applicable to prod, because environments don't match prod. But that can all be solved. You just need to go down that path. I don't think there's much data other than my talks on the market in the space. I have done some white papers to help organizations. You can find my white papers to do some of these principles. I haven't done an observability white paper yet, but I've done ones for the others.